Can you predict which team members are going to succeed as they're growing with the company?
Your willingness to invest from a leadership perspective in your people is actually the best predictor. Because if I hire you and I just hand you your badge and say, good luck, like that is such a crapshoot, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it happens. So I think the best predictor is. And man, is it hard when you are building a business and you're pulled in 33 different directions all at the same time. I get it. But if you are investing from a financial perspective in hiring somebody to do, whatever it is well worth your time to try to help make them successful. Certainly there are people that just aren't right for roles, but I gotta tell you, more times than not, had there been earlier intervention by leadership and management, most employee problems would not be problems.
Welcome to Builders, the podcast for impact-driven leaders who are done carrying it all and ready to scale with clarity, strategy, and freedom. I'm your host, Alex Snider, strategic growth architect, creator of the CEO Recode, and second brain to leaders who are building brilliant companies without sacrificing every ounce of their time, energy, or sanity. Each episode, I sit down with bold leaders who've rebuilt, recalibrated, or redefined what it means to lead well and live well on their own terms. We talk messy pivots, leadership upgrades, tactical wins, and the deep personal work it takes to build a business that actually works for you. If you love the episode, make sure you follow, rate, and share it with another leader who's building big and wants to build smarter. And if you're listening and thinking, damn, I need someone in the guts of my business with me, let's talk. Book your free business breakdown call using the link in the show notes. In 30 minutes, I'll help you pinpoint where blockers in your time, team, or strategy are silently stalling your growth, and define 2 to 3 high-impact shifts you can implement now to regain traction and build momentum. Now, let's dive in. Let's build it better. And welcome to Builders. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am absolutely stoked, honestly. And you're the founder of Anne Robie Consulting, and you focus on people. And for me, anyone who knows me, who's listened to this before, knows I firmly believe that people, talent, it's the engine of successful business. So creating an organization that attracts the best and then equips them to be even better is fundamental to building a scalable business. So
100%.
As always, I don't even try to do justice to my guests. Please, Anne, in your own words, tell us who you are and what you're building.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And thank you so much again for having me. So Anne Robie, let me tell you a little bit about me. I spent about 25 years in human resources. Sometimes people ask me, how did you get into HR? And it's literally, I followed a cute guy in college to a class and eventually ditched the guy, but sort of found a passion for people in HR. And that is truly and literally how I got into HR. I started with really big companies, like one of the biggest on the planet, IBM, at the beginning of my career, which was an amazing experience, and I learned a ton, and I never need to work for a 300,000 person company ever again. And then I've worked mostly in tech, but a little professional services and manufacturing for a hot second, but it was for wine. So, I had the extra benefit, if you know what I mean. And that's what's kind of cool about HR, is that it really, people are kind of people, and it applies, the skills that I have built sort of apply across industry. And so I left corporate HR about 4 years ago, and now I'm doing some keynote speaking, consulting, and coaching. And I'll often be brought in sort of in a fractional way to organizations that are kind of small to mid-sized growing. And it's often the case where they have converted the person that used to answer the phones for them, and now they've made that person the HR leader, and they're doing the very, very best that they can, and often really great work, but they're kind of missing that strategic head of HR. And so I will come in, and I have a firm belief that the CEO really needs sort of finance on one side and people on the other, and it creates this kind of polarity, and neither side is 100% right or wrong, but it gives the CEO the opportunity to have the different perspectives, and then they can then sit in the middle and sort of make the best decisions. So I started by following a cute guy to a class and then really just developed this passion for people and really trying to find ways to put people in positions where they can be the most successful, because we spend a hell of a lot of time at work, whether it's in a traditional office or building your own entrepreneurial thing, whatever it is. It takes a lot of our time and energy. And I just am a huge believer in finding the right people and creating opportunities for them such that they can really shine and they can do the very best work of their lives. So that's sort of a little bit of my trajectory. I'm here in San Diego, California, and I have a sweet pup named Chandi, and we find ourselves out on the beach quite a bit. So that's a little bit about me.
I love that. You've had a really incredible journey, as you mentioned, a lot of different roles, including, stint in Silicon Valley. You've been part of the team building some big products, some big names. I think your LinkedIn says Guru of Corporate WooWoo. Love that.
Yep. Right? You get to make up your own titles, right?
Yeah. It is a really magical world we live in with so much possibility these days. I always like to know was there a moment along the journey where you knew, that you were meant to build businesses and maybe also why this business? Why now? Is it a passion? Is it a gap in the market?
Yeah. Yeah, so for me, I mean, I really feel like I'm a solopreneur, and I'll pull in partners when I want to or need to on a particular project, but really I feel like I'm in the business of helping other organizations kind of build their businesses. And I really feel like often, just an example I just gave you, right? Often HR or the people side of business is sort of the last thought. And I firmly believe in my bones that it should be your first thought. I mean, unless you are 100% completely automated and you're AI all the time and you don't ever have to deal with humans, the fact is most businesses are driven by the people in the business. And I saw a lot of not great leadership throughout my career. And I also developed a bit of a passion. The reason I call myself the guru of corporate woo-woo, which there might have been a tiny bit of wine involved in coming up with that title, but the reason for it is I see people who will start an organization, start a business, and they're super passionate and they're doing their thing, and then somewhere along the way, either through board or fundraising or whatever happens in the whole build process, that they get further and further away from the truth of who they really are and their authentic expression. And so my firm belief is if we can invite people to bring their best selves to work, if we can invite people back into their own humanity and back into their authentic expressions of who they are, we're not only building better leaders, but we're building better organizations. And so I have a huge passion around helping leaders get back to themselves. I think we have a bit of an epidemic, especially in larger organizations, of a disconnection. And so how can we get a little bit closer back to who we really are, such that we then build trust within the organization, which, read any article ever, then that drives engagement and ultimately bottom and top line performance. So I don't know if there was a single moment as much as there was a collective of seeing some not great management throughout my career, and even in myself. I mean, I got to a point, I think at a certain point in my career, where I was kind of like trying to be like the boys, if you will, and I was toughing it out and growing it up and doing all of those things, and it wasn't me. I was kind of like doing yoga and breath work on the weekends, and then like there was this clear separation between who I was on the weekends and who I was during the week. I think that the more we can allow people to bring their whole integrated selves, the better organizations we can build.
So I think that's an amazing point. I love how you shared that, because I think a lot of us have experienced that to some degree. And, having also been through corporates and startups and my own businesses, I have seen this shift, I think, in the bigger picture over the last, 20 something years. And I've also lived it, where there's different perspectives. There's, work is work, and, there is this separation, there is this boundary. And then we've also gone with that, we want people to bring their full self to work and we want to create that space. And then we've gone from predominantly, all showing up in a shared physical space to remote. And then I guess the last layer I'll add to that is the idiom that like how you do one thing is how you do everything. And as a leader, you need to be in integrity for people to instinctively trust. And obviously the advent of the internet and social media and the world means that things that used to be more private aren't, whether you intend them to be or not.
Yeah.
And maybe that was like a jumble of things, but I'm curious, where do you start to unpick that? What are the lessons that you've seen leaders learn as they navigate those shifts? I mean, even for me, I used to have massive separation and boundaries and things around my work versus my personal.
Yeah. I mean, here's the deal is, for a while, and you mentioned this, there was this phrase, bring your whole self to work. Well, it's kind of cool in theory, but A, it's not reality. And B, I don't want the weed smoking, Cheeto eating, hanging with the boys on the couch. That's not who I want at work, And so I really think this is about bringing the most important parts of you and bringing the things that are most important to you as well, right? So I'll pick on myself a little bit, right? So I mentioned I was sort of doing yoga and breathwork and woo-woo stuff on the weekends, but then Monday would come and I'd play like the dude role again or something. And so I think it's this integration. I think I started becoming a better leader once I could kind of integrate those two things. So I had a tough experience. I was fired from a job, and upon reflect, at the time it felt like my world was ending. But upon reflection, what it was really about is they weren't getting the real me. They were getting some version I thought that they wanted of me. And so, of course, I wasn't showing up as the person they thought they had hired, right? And so, in my last corporate gig before I went out on my own, I worked really hard to bring more mindfulness and make space for people's lives that are sometimes messy, and have it be okay to talk about sort of the tougher things at work. And, frankly, that last role was during the pandemic, right? And so it was an Oakland-based company, and Black Lives Matter was happening, and then the pandemic was happening. It was all kind of all at once. And so our ability to kind of invite all of that in is really what made the organization stronger. And so you started with asking about other leaders, and I will tell you that, I can tell you about client after client, especially on the coaching side and a little bit on the consulting side as well, where, teams or individuals are doing the very best that they can, what they think that they can do. But the fact is that they're operating from fear or imposter syndrome. And so to the degree that we can invite those important parts of yourselves back into the room, back into your body in some ways, then we start getting the very best of people around the table, around the room. So if you look at, come back to me for a second, had I been fired and I was hitting on all cylinders and I was showing up and doing like exactly what I thought should be done, and bringing a little bit of that corporate woo-woo kookiness that is a part of who I am, had I been doing all that and then I'd been fired, I mean, it still would have sucked, but at least I would have been fired doing the thing that was true to me. Instead, I was playing very small and playing this very, kind of made for TV and not a good TV, like movie version of myself. And I see it with my clients all the time. So with a lot of my clients, it'll be about getting quiet, getting still, getting very present. You talked about boundaries and, having certain things that kind of shored you up at work. And I'm a big fan of boundaries, but let's have boundaries in terms of what is actually serving, not just to hide behind some sort of shield of armor, or not to boundary up about, oh, I can't ever let the fact that I'm having these things happen at home or other things going on in my life. That's a different kind of boundaries. You still need boundaries in order to, frankly, let yourself express in the right way, because you still have to protect part of who you are. but not just in the way because you think it's, I don't know, what's supposed to happen because now we're big boys and big girls playing in the corporate world, right? And so there's this push pull of being who you truly are while still maintaining the maybe you do eat the Cheetos and smoke the weed on the weekends or whatever, right? That's your prerogative. You do you. But at work, bringing the most beautiful parts of you are the way to is the way to both have great leadership in terms of now you see me, who I truly am, and then it invites others in as well.
I love that. So yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, as a leader, getting quiet, being in the moment, not maybe being stuck in the future or the past, but actually seeing what's in front of you, and that makes you a better leader. What is your role, or what have you seen as the most successful ways of really normalizing that for your team?
Yeah, I think it starts at the individual level. So I will often come in and do like coaching with the senior team, right? Like there'll just be sort of a sense of, hey, we're good, but we're not great. Like people are individually doing the stuff that they're supposed to be doing, but as a team, we're not quite rowing all in the same direction yet. And so I'll often start with something like the Enneagram, for people to really get clear on who they are. And I'm certified in the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and DISC and StrengthsFinder and a bunch of stuff. But the Enneagram to me is the very most powerful tool that people can use to really start looking at themselves and understanding how they tick. Because unlike the other tools, the Enneagram actually examines not just what we do, but why. It really gets into the motivation. What is the drive? Alex, you and I could do the exact same thing, but our motivation, our drive underneath is going to be different. So in order to normalize kind of bringing more of yourself into the office, I think that you actually start with understanding who you really are and getting very clear with that. And the other thing I love about the Enneagram is I believe it's an empathy building tool. So not only do I now get clear on who I am, but I'm also more clear on who you are. And so what maybe used to annoy me a little bit, so I'm like, oh, I get it. That's actually Alex's way of like showing she cares or her contribution to the team. And so it builds this empathy. And so how you start to normalize is by going in first and understanding yourself, whether you use the Enneagram or some other tool. I really strongly believe that you have to, I'm going to pause my own story for a second because it just popped in my head. I can't tell you how many times the CEO will call and say something like, hey, my team sort of sucks and we need to fix them. And I kind of get this, with the fingers a little bit. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that's my first clue that we need to start with you actually, right? And so starting with the individual and understanding ourselves and the impact that we're having and maybe the shield we're hiding behind or the armor that we've built up or the fears that we have, whatever that is, it starts here first. So the way we normalize it for everybody else, and it's so critical for senior leadership teams, right? Same thing, whether in HR, you might do something like a employee engagement survey, or, you might do some of these other things. And again, it all seems to be out there, like just fix them over there. But the fact is that it starts at the top. And if we're being assholes at the top, then guess what? You're going to build an organization full of little assholes or full of people that are scared and won't actually bring the very thing that we hired them for in the first place, which is their amazing creativity, which also comes with a side of weird at times, right? Like it's just the way humans are.
Yeah. I always say the most wonderful people are the weirdest. So
Yes.
Look for the weird and you'll probably find the
Exactly.
wonderful. I absolutely agree. Yeah, flows from the top. I probably say that 10 times a day. For people listening
Yeah.
who may not know what Enneagrams are, can you give us like the crash course on what is it, in itself in relation to some of the other potentially more well-known, DISC, Myers-Briggs. I think they're all great, but yeah, what is Enneagram?
So they all have their place 100%. And I actually joke, like, I don't care if it's the Cosmo quiz, honestly. If it gives you some sort of insight into yourself and how you operate, amen to that, right? Like, awesome. But the reason I think most people have heard of Myers-Briggs, and some people have heard of DISC, and StrengthsFinder is actually, if anybody listening doesn't have, the budget to hire like a big, huge Enneagram expert or somebody doing any of this, StrengthsFinder is like a $28 book, and you just buy it for everybody on your team, and now you can have a robust discussion about the way that we each operate. And I like StrengthsFinder. It's a nice entry point, and I love it's based on positive psychology. What are you already good at that you could be great at? So amazing. But truly, so any tool you use can have a place as long as it's not just like that thing we did on a Tuesday afternoon once and then it just goes away, right? Like the way any of these things become meaningful is to implement them across the organization. And I'm super lucky in that when I got really, really into the Enneagram, I was the head of HR for a small tech company. We probably, small is relative in the Valley, right? So it was like 700 people eventually. But what was cool about it is that I was able to train about 70% of the employee population in the Enneagram, which meant we then had a common language, right? And of course, with any of these kinds of tools, you have to be careful not to use it. It's neither a shield nor a weapon, is what I try to say. But it is a way of operating, and it became for us a way of playing to people's strengths. So specific to the Enneagram, it's similar to some of these other. I'm going to broadly use the term personality assessment. Some of my hardcore Enneagram people would not love it if I called it that, but in essence, just for sake of simplicity, we're going to call it that. What I dig about it is it goes so much deeper than any of these other assessments do. And so, as I mentioned a few moments ago, it is measuring why we do what we do, not what we do. And that starts to get into some of those deep psychological kind of motivations. So one of the reasons I think it's so cool is in corporate, I can just stay at that very top level. Right? We could just sort of talk about, I operate in this way, you operate in this way. What does that mean for us on the team? Let's talk about how we can get the best out of everybody, blah, blah, blah. We can see how this could go really well. What's very cool about the Enneagram is you can keep going. Some people, I'll get a call sometimes and somebody will say, hey, we need you to come do a 1 hour Enneagram like course or something. And I'm like, yeah, no, sorry, I'm just not going to do it. Because I could probably teach for 5 days and then come back in a couple of months and do more on it, right? I don't. Usually it's like a 4-hour workshop or something.
Just to be clear.
But like I would love to. But the most powerful, I think, engagements I've ever had are people that will do something like that. My very favorite way to use it is we kick off, for instance, an offsite meeting, and we'll do the Enneagram for about half a day, but then we'll do some strategic planning. And now we have a foundation for why is Alex? Okay, I see. Alex, you're sitting back there really quiet. I'm curious, do you need time away or whatever the thing might be? And so setting it as a foundation for how we do kind of, I'll put in air quotes, the real work is really helpful and important. And then coming back to it. So I love when organizations will bring me back 1 month, 3 months later, and we'll we've started with a little foundation, and then how do we build a little bit more and build a little bit more such that I continue to excavate what's going on for me. Okay, there's Anne. She's a little trigger happy sometimes when she feels cornered. Okay, there it is, right? So I'm continuing to understand myself a little bit more, but also you, right? And the other people in the group or the team or wherever. And so for me, this is my favorite tool to use, but any tool that somebody decides to invest in any particular way, it's not a one and done. It's got to be a way that we start to then operate and how we kind of do business. We use it. It's not just that interesting thing we did because I needed to hire a development person during an offsite or something, right? We actually use it, and we use it going forward to help us be more effective.
Don't love a box checking exercise. We want
never
in there. I loved when you said a common language, and I often liken, business relationships, team, to relate to romantic relationships because of the need for communication and boundaries and all kinds of things. And something that I have really observed with the privilege I've had of living around the world is how often, like cross-cultural, but particularly couples whose first languages are not the same, are often, not always, often very good communicators because they don't rely on the assumption
Yes.
that drive so much of our day to day, right? You're like, well, when I say this, you know what I mean. And then you're like, you just said that? How dare
Right.
you? Right? And it
Right.
meant completely different things. And so I loved when you said you're creating this common lexicon for the organization, for the teams, for the leaders, to have a shared awareness and a way to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. And it takes the I am this and you are that out of it a little bit, right? It takes the sort of sting or the assumption like, oh, there's Alex again. Why is she always blah blah blah, fill in the dots, right? And I'd never thought about what you just said about the fact that, the first language. I think that's really, really insightful. And if you then, so we're speaking the same language, you and I, and then we then layer some sort of either corporate or even cultural, something around that, it it then becomes, I think I know what you're saying, and I make an assumption about what you meant by something or didn't say, whatever the case might be. And all of a sudden, it doesn't matter that we were both think we're speaking English, right? We are really having two separate conversations. And so,
We're working in parallel. We're not
yes,
actually like
yes,
interviewing. And, to your point, culture as well. I've worked on a lot of cross-cultural teams. I took cross-cultural management in my MBA, like one class. We went to Brazil. But I have had the privilege to work on teams that have anywhere from 2 to 10 nationalities, let's say.
yeah,
And that for me, one of the things that I will stand on till the day I don't plan to retire, so die, I guess, is you have to be so intentional in creating either the team culture, the project culture, or the
yes,
company culture. I also will have a whole soapbox about culture as infrastructure, but in what we're talking about, it's okay, we're all here to do something. Are we clear on what that is? And then,
yeah,
okay, well, how do we engage? What are the expectations? Does anyone like really finding the way? And you have to kind of create safety one-on-one, usually with people for them to then show up. But like, does anyone have a contribution or something to say about that is necessary for them to be their best self, right?
yeah, yeah,
And then as a leader, I think you have a responsibility to know that no matter how much of that you do, everyone is still, I say you have to have a user manual for every employee. Everyone is still a unique organism, and
yeah.
you have to be aware of that and then kind of like be tweaking things around the outside for this group to function optimally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you just said so much in there. It's so beautiful. I love specifically about a user manual for each person because here's the deal. Like, I don't know, you just mentioned the MBA, whether it's B school or it's just growing up in a company or whatever, we start to kind of homogenize how we treat people. And, there's the golden rule about treat everybody how you want to be treated. But then there's the platinum rule, right? Like treat everybody how they want to be treated. And the fact is the way you operate is different from the way that I operate. And man, it'd be easier if that wasn't the way, but that's just not living in reality, right? And
Oh
so
no.
if I can have a little more understanding and insight about your motivations and what's exciting to you and what lights you up, that just made my job a hell of a lot easier because I know I can put you on something specific that you get something out of, that you like, that you love, right? And now, work is work. But the fact is if I have you pointed in the thing that lights you up, this is great for not only for you, but also for the business. And so I think having an owner's manual is such an interesting way to think about it. And I always say, once you have a little bit of insight and information, so whether it's the Enneagram or something else, you can no longer just sit back and be like, okay, you got to come over here to where I am. It is now my responsibility to come over to where you are. It'd be really nice if everybody just did the things the way I wanted them done. But again, like we live in the real world and that's just not how it works. And so I love that perspective and I'm totally going to steal it from now on.
Absolutely.
I mean, I wanted to comment on one other thing that you said, if it's okay, and that is this intentionality around culture. Because I think, especially when entrepreneurs, founders are starting something new, there's a bit of a built-in enthusiasm and excitement, and you're probably pulling in your buddies and your friends. You're kind of thinking alike. And when I actually worked for StubHub for part of my career, and they would tell stories about literally taking doors off the wall and sticking them on whatever those the horse things, whatever they're called, like just to create to create little desks. And this to me, like when you are new and starting something, you kind of have a little built-in grace because everybody's a little bit excited about it. But you do not have to get too big and you do not have to get too far down the road before you have to be super, super thoughtful about what exactly it is you're trying to build and what is important to you, right? So I have a client who I was talking to recently, and they have a strong rotation towards flexibility, and which is amazing, and which includes lots of time off and other things. And so they were starting to have a conversation about next year and holidays and time off and all the things. And they'd kind of gotten away from their North Star of flexibility is important because they were focusing on a big project that had to be done and lots of other things. And so I brought the conversation back to, how does this fit in with one of our stated values? How does this align with what you have said is incredibly important to you? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying let's articulate how this aligns with what we have said is important, or let's restate what we think is important. But we can't sort of say flexibility is important, but nobody gets to take time off in the first quarter, right? Like those two things just don't go together.
In this instance.
Yes. Yes. So the people who are building something right now, when you're baby brand new, yeah, no problem. You can kind of get by just on passion and a little adrenaline. But not too far down the road, you have to start really thinking about who are we and what are we trying to build and what do we want our mark to be in the world, and to put some thought into that. And then that becomes the lens through which you make decisions, such as we were just talking about. It's the lens through which you hire people. It's the lens through which you evaluate people. All of the things is how you start to really build your organization and build your business when you start to grow a bit.
I love that you highlighted that. I've actually spoken on this, and that transition, if we're talking like startup, of, I'm going to say 1 to 3 people who are in it to win it, who have often very blurry roles, who are also in constant connection and communication and just moving at a pace. That is a very unique time that doesn't get repeated unless you fail and start again. But it does not get repeated in the growth of an organization, unlike a lot of things that are kind of this going around and, being repeated. That is very unique. And the circumstance of the personality types that succeed in that environment and contribute to it, the size and communication and dynamic, it's very unique. And often the way that you work in that pod doesn't translate well to the 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th, 20th person.
That's right.
Actually, if you do not take a moment and decide if that culture is one you want amplified, that can be your downfall. Because you'll say, oh, our culture is this, and you'll try and get everyone to work that way, but then they'll be interfacing with this pod that's just chaotic.
Right.
And that only flies for so long. That only flies, I call it like front page, outliers who are doing so unique that people will put up with the BS to be part of it. Okay, most of us are not building the next Apple. So love it, whatever you're building, but there is a level of uniqueness that people will put up with a lot to be part of. And then also all of those people at a certain point get someone who like buffers craziness, right? They're chaos. And so I really think what you highlighted is actually very important if anyone is at that early stage and they're like in it, like you said, with their broskies or girlskis. I don't know you know what I mean. It's not, it's a gender neutral gift. Like, and you're in it and you're doing, and I've had a little bit of that dynamic with co-founders, like we know each other and we kind of know what the other person means, or we know they don't mean badly and we can put up with their bullshit because like we share values. That doesn't extend to employees, and it shouldn't.
Yeah. Right.
Like, and that's often been my role to a degree, is to be like, hey, we have to cut it out, or we have to change this, or we have to at the minimum temporarily contain it to us until we can fix it in a bigger and better way.
That's right.
Because this cannot leak out into our team. It's
right.
kryptonite.
100%. And I would actually say even the contain within ourselves, people can feel it, they can sense it, right?
It's like until we can fix it, like,
yes,
just be aware enough to like lock it down and then work on it.
Yeah.
But be careful about, when we work on it. and
super important. But
presence, right? Taking a breath before you go from that conversation to somewhere else. And
that's right.
Like, okay, this isn't perfect, and I'm not carrying that into my next meeting.
That's right.
Whatever that might be.
I call those mindful moments, right? So like just taking a breath, or taking and I'll tell you, I one time was invited to a board meeting of a client that I was working with, and I wasn't hired by the board, but the board wanted to talk to me. And things weren't going swimmingly well on the senior leadership team. And I walked into the room and it just felt crappy. It just felt, you could just, when you just get that sense, it just felt heavy and like almost like angry. I just had this sense of like muck in the room. And of course, it's the typical no windows. And I'm like, if there had been, I would have thrown windows open or something to try to like, but I didn't have that option. And so I turned to the board chair, who I had known had gone to Kerpalo once. And so I turned to her and I said, what do you think about doing a quick little meditation to switch the energy in this room? And, a couple of the guys were like Wall Street, pointy shoe, fancy watch types, right? And they were like, eyebrows shot up to the top of their heads. But I knew it was a gamble, but it was a calculated one. And she's like, yeah, let's do that. And I will tell you that I just did a couple minutes of breathing with them, and find your feet, lift the crown of your head, lift towards the sky, like feel your heart, all the things, right? And a few deep breaths together. And there was a palpable, something you could really feel. There's a shift in the room, and we had the tough conversation we had to have, but I think it went a lot better as instead of starting from a stance of like arms crossed and like angry, like for no other reason that I made them, right, uncross their arms and put their hands on their knees. It definitely shifted. And so that was a more formal approach. But when, to your point and your example, going from meeting to meeting, like just taking a breath. And I got to a point when I was still in corporate where I would not book an hour-long meeting. I would only book 45 or 25-minute meetings because I just need that time to be like, okay, look at my shoulders are up around my ears. Can I actively roll them down my shoulders and take a few deep breaths and find oxygen coursing through my blood again, and it is super helpful. And if you build it in as a practice, like before every meeting, we're just gonna pause and take 3 deep breaths together. Then for the first couple times it's weird, and then after that it's just like what we do, right? And you start to build in this healthy habit.
Yeah, I love that. I did that, but it was because I needed time to sprint across to the next meeting room because our offices were so large. When I
go to the bathroom or something,
London. I'd be like hours in, I'd be like, I have to pee so badly. But it's funny actually when you say about, it feels funny, but you get used to it. We're going to go even more woo-woo. I learned cut your cords, like cord cutting.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time somebody taught me that, I was like, what in the world. And then I realized, so I was like remote worker through consulting quite a lot because you're on the road, so you're doing certain remote, but you are also usually at clients or in your office. But I kind of took that, and when I left corporate and consulting, I became nomadic, and this is pre-pandemic. So I was kind of nomadic. I was like, I think you could run anything from anywhere if you're willing to sacrifice. I could go on about that. But what I did realize is I went from going from meeting to sitting in front of a computer, and just the meetings just came to me.
And never leaving, never leaving your desk.
And never really stepping away unless you need a bio break. And so, a few years later, when somebody introduced the concept of cord cutting to me, even though I thought it was kind of crazy, I was like, I'll try anything twice. And I started doing it, and I was like, this is great. And you know what it was? It was that I felt my body relax.
Yes.
I felt my body relax and reset before I did the next thing. And so whether you believe in like spiritual energy, whatever, it's just a like switch flip at minimum. Yes. It might be more for your brain to take a pause and like re-engage. And yes. It's wild what that does for your energy, your demeanor, your physical expression of whatever emotions you just went through. And if you think that you're not emotional in meetings, then like I have bad news for you.
Yes, again. Yeah. No, I love that. And, whether somebody is into cord cutting or whether they are, into these mindful moments, or again, it's like the Cosmo quiz joke I made. Like I don't care, but have a practice, maybe it's you're taking a sip of your coffee right now, right? So maybe it is a moment where you go make your coffee, but you make it in an intentional way, and you're not doing 14 other things and checking your email and posting on TikTok or whatever at the same time. You're just making your coffee, and you ritualize it, and you're fully present to making your coffee, or fully present. I don't care, making a copy, like whatever it is, but can you be fully present in that moment and on purpose, and call it meditation or call it prayer or cord cutting, or it doesn't matter, but just having that, like, okay, I'm switching from what I was doing then, and I'm taking my breath, and I'm moving on to the next thing. And especially in corporate, you talked about physically, literally running, and that does happen at times. If you're on a big campus or something, you're actually running.
Feels like nobody's business.
Right? It's craziness. So like,
go.
Oh my God. Back in the day, it was me on airplanes and like super ridiculous high heels and a laptop on my shoulder. Like, no wonder I have like back issues now, right? Like, it's hilarious.
Yes, ma'am.
Too funny.
What's your experience in how, all the things that we've just talked about, presence, breath, moments, meditation, awareness and communication around personality, how does that impact, leaders' decision making and their, the speed, and I want to say like smoothness of growth?
Yeah. No, it's such a powerful question, because I remember when I was younger and more junior in my career, and I've had many people say, "Oh, I don't have time for any of that stuff," right? And I remember thinking that too. And it is the classic slow down to go faster is really what it is. It truly is. And so if you are in a high stress situation and needing to make decisions quickly, you're not always going to make the best decisions when you're in that more triggered emotional state, right? Like if there's just a way to down regulate just a little bit to take the edge off, you are making better decisions, and ultimately you will go faster because you're not cleaning up the shit you created because you were making not great decisions, right? And so to me, all of these are not just nice to haves. This is a critical way to operate. And, I'm thinking about a couple of people that I've worked with that were pretty good at their day jobs, mostly sales, but not exclusively, where they're like, go, 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 go. And I get it. Like, that's great. And that's how you're rewarded as well. But then they would apply that to leadership, and they would try to both judge other folks that couldn't kind of keep up at that same sort of pace, and set these super, super high expectations. And so they would burn their employees out and they would churn through them. So you want to talk about going faster? You want to talk about having better results? Well, don't kill your people in the process. Like, sure, have a high standard and make sure you're holding people accountable. All those things are remain important, but set the environment so that they can be successful. And that takes you being in charge of you first and like coming back to your own center such that you can lead from a place of clarity as opposed to this sort of reactivity mode.
So I want to come back to something you said earlier about the idea of like a CEO having kind of finance and HR to provide, different models of thinking about the business, provide that polarity. And you also talked about, strategic HR, because I think HR is often a very underrated and misunderstood department function. What is a strategic HR leader's role?
Yeah. It's a really, really good question, and it is sort of how I'm brought in, as I mentioned at the beginning, a little bit in this more fractional kind of way, right? Because um, not only is HR undervalued, but you actually don't need somebody at not tooting my own horn, but somebody kind of at my level at the beginning. You don't, or maybe you need 5 hours of somebody like me a month, but not 40 hours a week or
You
plus or
don't get to
whatever.
be a full-time CEO until your company is huge. I try to, that's
100%,
something I work on my
100%.
clients. And like, you need CEO time, but you can't be a CEO every day, all day, because
You
this
don't
is
get to sit
going
back
to
and just, yeah.
justify that. So like, we block it out. So I think fractional leadership and expertise is one of the most incredible things about this period in time.
100%, because you in HR you do need somebody that knows what flipping posters to put on the wall and stays up to date on I live in California and we've got a lot of funky labor laws here, right? And like not what I'm good at and not what you want to pay me to figure out. You'll overpay and I'll underdeliver. Not ever the best combination. But what strategic HR does is it's just like every other, if you use C-suite titles, whatever, like that sits around your leadership table. And probably the best advice I got from a CEO early in my career when I started having more senior HR roles was, I expect you to come with the HR hat on, but once you're sitting around the table, you are a business person around that table, and you might bring a little bit more of the people perspective, which is great. That's why I've hired you. But I expect you to be able to weigh in on acquisition strategy or growth strategy, or, maybe they didn't want me weighing in on all the financial stuff, trust me. But like, being able to be well versed enough so that I could speak intelligently about it. Strategic HR to me is really about being a business partner and understanding what's going on in the organization, bringing that people lens about, name whatever you're trying to do. We're trying to grow, acquire, divest, double our sales, whatever that might, all of that has people implications. And so being the person that is sort of the point of the tip of the spear in the room that can really lead the conversation, which also doesn't mean, by the way, the only person that's going to ever have an opinion or be the only person to be able to weigh in on something, but to be the expert in the room on how people are operating, what are the things that we need to think about, whatever our particular strategy is that we're thinking about or talking about at the moment. What is the people perspective on that? And so to me, there's this difference between the operational aspects of HR, like how do we get done the business of human resources on a day-to-day basis. I have other people for that. I'm not good at it. Versus the more strategic, like, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? And what's the finance perspective? What's the sales perspective? What's the marketing perspective? What's the people perspective, right? Like each role around the table has something to add, but it's the collective of all of us thinking with our own particular areas of expertise that gets to the best solution.
I love that you said that. I love you said HR business partner, because that was exactly what came to mind for me. I remember, I think the first client I encountered that was Rio Tinto. And it was this concept that there's HR, which is large and has, as you said, the business of HR, hiring, firing, contracts, benefits. And then there's almost like the translator and the connector. And that was what they, at least I've seen it in slightly different ways, but I worked heavily in energy, natural resources. And so in these large, top 5 kind of organizations, they would have someone whose role it was to represent HR and people and then go be the business partner for the different departments and help them make decisions, understand people's roles. But to your point, you had to understand business, and that's why you were a business partner.
That's
and
right.
I think that's such a great definition. And I think it's still surprisingly something that's not maybe widely understood. I think because it often either exists in the founder or doesn't, or exists in these very large,
Right.
your energy company, your mining company, like massive, massive multinationals. So coming back to the idea of fractional a little bit, right? Like you have worked with some really interesting organizations. I think you worked with Ironman Group as a fractional role. What fractional roles are often a bridge, as you said. You don't need a full-time this yet, but the benefit of having that level of thinking that's not just coming in as a consultant to do a project and leave is really beneficial. So what does the bridge kind of look like? When do you know it's time to start hiring that role in? Who, if you aren't having a fractional person, who else, like what other hat in leadership does it maybe often get shared with most optimally?
Yep. So, this is the benefit about bringing somebody in on a fractional basis is they can look under the hood. And if they're, my job is actually most of the time to work myself out of a job. Truly, I don't say that to be trite, because either the company is growing such that they are going to need to find a real deal, chief people officer or whatever the title might be at that company. Or if they go in the other direction and it's more like they need an adult in the room to kind of help them step down, and then they can hand it off to like a director or something until they start moving in a more positive direction again. So I wouldn't say there's a specific time, and it's different for every kind of organization, and especially if it's a people heavy versus a tech or machine heavy in some way. But what I have heard from boards and what I've heard from investment kinds of firms as well is that it's super clear when it's not happening. And I think you kind of don't want to get to that point where the board says, you must do this, right? Like you should proactively be thinking about, you named it earlier, Alex, like once you get past just a few people, like now is when we need to start proactively thinking about what are we trying to create. And so that might mean fractional, but it also just might mean like I do coaching as well, right? And so coaching is also kind of one-on-one what's really going on with you from a human perspective. But trust me, we end up going way into the business stuff at times as well, because like maybe that's all you need until you get to, I don't know, 50 or 75 people or whatever the right number is. So I don't think there's a magic number, but I do know you don't want either investors or your board coming to you to say you have a problem. You want to be ahead of that.
Like being called up to the front of the class. You're like, you just want to come clean and handle it.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's interesting what you said, working with the leaders. I think people skills are so crucial in building a business, which means they're crucial to entrepreneurship. They're crucial to being a founder. I think we're starting to understand the value of it. We're starting to, frankly, understand the science of, gut instincts. But similar to what I just talked about, as companies grow, they need to rely on a larger system than gut feel. And you've been part of a lot of organizations that have grown, in your roles as well as now in a consulting, a fractional, a coach. Does data come into this? Can you predict, which team members are going to succeed either, when you're hiring them, but I think almost more importantly, like as they're growing with the company?
Yeah, it's a whole interesting field right now. There's a lot of predictive analytics going on in regards to people's backgrounds, how they show up, how effective they are, their ability to kind of get stuff done that's important to the organization, all of that. So, and I'm not an expert on that, but here's what I would say. And that is your willingness to invest from a leadership perspective in your people is actually the best predictor. Because if I hire you and I just hand you your badge and say, good luck. Like, that is such a crapshoot, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it happens on a regular. It's happened to me. Like, okay, congrats, good luck to you, right? And so I think the best predictor is the leadership's willingness to engage and stay engaged. And man, is it hard when you are building a business and you're pulled in 33 different directions all at the same time. I get it. But if you are investing from a financial perspective in hiring somebody to do, whatever it is well worth your time to try to help make them successful. And certainly there are people that just aren't right for roles, and certainly there are people that end up whatever happens and they make a turn that isn't supportive of the organization. But I got to tell you, more times than not, had there been earlier intervention by leadership and management, most employee problems would not be problems. And I think that smaller organizations, it's tougher, but in bigger organizations, I can almost find a role for anybody within the company to be successful, as long as we're willing to make the investment, understand what motivates them, help them be better at whatever it is. Yes, sometimes we have to make the tough decision and talk about cutting cords, right? Like, sometimes we have to do that. But at the end of the day, I really put a lot of responsibility on founders and owners and C-suite, depending on your organization, to make the right kinds of investments in the very expensive acquisition you just made of a new person in your company.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that that's critical.
Yeah. Onboarding, expectation setting.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yep.
So, we just talked about kind of the moment someone comes in and investing. And, I think that also applies as they move up through their career. And it's not always going to be the owner or the founder, but, key people in the organization. But the organization itself goes through change. And I know change management is something that you work on. I spent a lot of time dealing with that in my, consulting days. It's great to come up with a new way of doing something, but then getting everyone to actually do it is a whole other kettle of fish, right? If your business is growing, then change is inevitable. And, that's the nature of scale. Is it inevitably difficult for teams?
Change? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
It is inevitably difficult. It is. That does not mean it's impossible. And it also doesn't mean, God forbid, you shouldn't do it, because change, the only thing that's constant is change, right? But I think there's ways that you can, again, it takes investment management, leadership investment in some resiliency, right? And helping individuals and teams understand the importance of kind of the bigger picture, right? So always, I'd say, I was at StubHub for about 5 years, and I'd say the thing that StubHub did better, they're not as great anymore, but what they did better at the time than anybody else I'd ever worked for, is having kind of eyes on the prize. Like, 100% of people that we interviewed were asked the question, what are you a fan of? And the reason for that is we wanted, whether it was the receptionist or an engineer or our new marketing person, it did whatever role, we wanted them to understand what it was like to be so excited to see your favorite team play or your favorite musician come to town or whatever, and understand what that vibe was. And once you have that kind of eyes on the prize thing, then things like change become easier. And, is it inevitably difficult? Change is hard for humans. It just is. But there are ways to make it easier and to ease the path.
We have a couple rapid fire questions, one word, one sentence. But just before we jump into that, what is the best place? We'll make sure we put it all in the notes for people to find you, to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is my name, so AnneRobie.com, and I'm really active on LinkedIn, so find me there as well. And I'm wading into Instagram. It should be launched here sometime soon. So hopefully by the time this drops, I can have a link for you and for your show notes.
Beautiful. Okay, 5 quick questions. What's one decision that changed everything for you as a leader?
I think I think so. I mentioned that I had been fired from a job and it was completely devastating. But I made a decision to not just jump back into work. I was lucky, my phone was ringing, people were making offers, and I had some opportunities. But I took about 9 months off and I traveled a bunch, got coaching certifications, got a yoga certification, did a bunch of things of investing in me and taking a breath to really understand how I had gotten to that point. So, my decision to not jump back in changed how I look at everything in leadership.
That. What does strategy feel like when you're doing it well?
Mm. Everything is like in alignment. It's like in flow a little bit, I think, right? And so there's kind of an energy, almost like a bubbly, like a effervescence and a man, we're on to something here, right? Like it's this enthusiasm and excitement. So I think when strategy is kind of going well, we've got a team around the table, and it feels like we are just rocking and rolling together.
Incredible. Is there a book, person, or podcast that really cracked something open for you?
Um, it's funny. I was just having this conversation with a friend the other day. There's a woman whose name is Carolyn Mays, and I call her my gateway drug to spirituality. And it's not directly applicable to work. She talks about the book that really cracked it open for me is called Anatomy of the Spirit. But what it did crack open is a different way of looking at things, and it doesn't all have to be buttoned up in corporate type of approach. So Carolyn May's Anatomy of the Spirit, amazing.
What's something you said never again to in your business?
Never again to working with people who I think are assholes.
Yes.
Full stop.
And if you had a free weekend, zero obligations, how would you spend it?
I love that. Kind of I would wake up and probably head to the beach and take my pup for a walk and see where the day took me. Maybe a lovely brunch with some friends and get some yoga in. So a lot of being outside, a lot of movement, and a lot of connecting with people that I care about.
Incredible. And thank you again. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alex. I really love what you do, so I really, really appreciate the invitation to be here today.
Amazing. That's a wrap for this episode of Builders, where we get real about what it actually takes to grow companies that perform without grinding you into the ground. If today's convo sparks something for you, here's what to do next. Follow the show, drop a 5-star review, and share it with someone else who's building big. Don't let it be lonely at the top. If you're ready for more clarity, more leadership freedom, and less of a duct tape and go growth vibe, let's connect. Book your free business breakdown call using the link in the show notes. In 30 minutes, I'll help you pinpoint where blockers in your time, team, or strategy are silently stalling your growth. Walk away with a personalized fix-it list that gives you the clarity you've been craving on what to shift now to regain traction and build momentum. For more tools, insights, and my no-fluff takes on leadership and scaling strategically, join the Builders Club, also linked in the show notes. You can also head over to leaderswhobuild.com, where you'll find all the links to peep my creds, see client wins, or just confirm that yes, I went to the gym today. Until next time, keep leading boldly, building smart, and living success on your terms.